before we build an app, we need to define what we want the app to do. So you might want to build a CRM, or you might want to build an inventory management tool, right? What does that look like? How many users are we going to have? Do we need admins? Are we designing this as something to use internally at our company? Or are we designing this as something that we are going to use for resale to others, right? And how are those others going to use it? What types of users are there going to be? You may have a app you build that has different things visible to admins and different things visible to regular users, right? So we want to make sure we define that kind of structure. You should write this out, visualize it. It can be helpful to even draw out what you want things to look like before you start building. And this helps you to, before you start building workflows and everything, to understand what your goal is. And a lot of times, if your goal is to have a visibility like a report, right, it can be helpful to work backwards. So write this out. As example, you might want to take time just to plan how data is going to move throughout your system, where it's going to be updated, if it's updated at all. Like you could have it where some things are entered in and they will just be created in the system, right? There's other times where you'll have things get created in, and those are things that are updatable, right? Like you might have a customer that gets put in, and your customer that you have created in the system is something you want to have continually updated in case they change their phone number. The way Bubble treats these are by creating things. Things in Bubble are exactly what they sound like. It's a thing. I like to imagine them as boxes. So it's a box with a series of compartments inside, right? So our box, our thing, might be called customer. And this customer will have a series of attributes, which would be the compartments inside of the box. And we can put data into each one of those compartments. So we might have a customer, and that customer could have a company, phone number, name, or contact name, email address, all these things associated, right? So that customer would then have all of those kind of slots within the box. That's how I like to visualize it. It helps me for kind of thinking about how I want to use this data and how I want to pull that data out for maybe reporting later on. So, as an example, I may be building a business-to-business app that requires multiple users in the same site. In this case, you need a means of designating data available to which users to view, right? So maybe we filter this by who created it, but then we only have the creator able to view it, but we want the company to view it, right? So maybe we filter it by the company that someone's a part of, right? So anyone who's also a part of that company in our system is then going to be able to view the data related and enter data that would go back to relating to this company to be able to do it. It's conceptualizing these thoughts, right? We need to be able to visualize how the data is going to be entered, right? From a planning point. You know, how is the data going to be entered? How is it going to be used? How is it going to be altered? And how is it going to be viewed, right? So when you start thinking about how you want to view it, how you want to alter it, how you want to use it, you can more easily create how you want to enter it. So it's not necessarily a case of creating entry points for putting this data in. It's oftentimes useful to say, this is what I want to do with this data, and that determines how you want to enter it in, right? So there might be fields that you wouldn't initially think that you're going to want to put in, right? So say you have a series of forms that you want, and you want to have them created, and fields on these forms that will signify a quantity, right? So you then have those numbers able to be tallied, right? So you have all these quantities from these forms that are tallied, and you can use that data to view quantities that are entered over a period of time in specific intervals, right? So I could say from June to July, how many times was a form submitted? But I could also say the total quantity between all of these forms, how many times, what's that total, right? So like each form, there could be 10 forms, but each form could vary between 1 and 10 on it, right? So that would give me a ability to have a number between 10 and 100. To tally up that number, I can take a look at that form and I can say, this box, I want all of the numbers in these calculated together, added up to give me a number that I'm going to show on a graph. On that graph, I can show June and July next to each other to easily display what the difference was between the months. This is for measuring, right? That's a really simplified idea, but it has real application inside of building a business tool. So you could track the number of times something is happening within a year or a month, or the number of products you're selling within a time frame, or the number of leads that you're gathering in a time frame. So you can judge where these leads are coming from and how you want to manage it. An example of a type of app you could easily build would be an app to track write-ups at your company, right? So say your company's big, you're starting to actually implement more policies, you develop that point, you're having a hard time tracking, disciplinary policy. You've got a lot of people that aren't actually following the rules, and you want to make sure that you're tracking this appropriately because now you have rules for ensuring that you're letting go of people who just aren't following policy, right? So you track write-ups at the company. You can have fields for which managers that are entering the item. You can track the manager, you can track the employees that are receiving the item, what facility it happened in, what rules were violated, and the dates they occurred. Then we can go and we can use this data, right? So you could take a look at your company and you can create forms that are actually going to, or outputs that will actually show you, on like a graph very easily, how often are staff being written up for being late? How often are staff being written up for bullying or whatever else you put in for tracking? And you can create the ability to have users go in and create what they want to have tracked, right? So if they have a series of things, they could go in and they could put, one day something happens, they didn't think they were ever going to have to track it, but now they do. They could go in, enter that thing, it shows up in a new drop down, they add that to the form, and now your users are able to track that for their company and run reports that show it, right? So that's able to be built in Bubble, but you have to plan out what you want to have user ability to do before you actually go and build the function, because it's going to save you a lot of time by having that planned out instead of just trying to build everything into a couple of pages. You might find it's better to have 5 or 6 pages instead of 4 or 2, right? So 5 or 6 pages opposed to 2 because you're spreading out the visibility of this data. It looks cleaner, it's less cluttered, and it gives you the ability to add more when you need to later on, because even though we're going to plan this out ahead and it's going to give us the ability to be kind of ahead of the game in our planning of this app, we're also going to know later on we're going to make alterations, and we want to leave room for those alterations to still look natural. So we want to plan all of this out. It's always good to just take a few minutes before you're going to start building and say, this is the end goal of my app. This is what I want to do. I want to create the ability to pull reports in this app for tracking employees, write-ups, right? We would want the ability to easily view any write-ups associated to an employee, how many there are. We would want probably to track what facilities they're happening the most in case there's a problem at one specific facility, what rules are being violated the most so that we know as a company what ones we want to train on. And we want to know if it's seasonal, right? So when we hire a lot of temps in the summer, are we seeing a huge influx of people showing up late just because we have so many people? Or do we know that in the winter, because weather's bad, we have people that just aren't showing up on time because weather's bad, and we need to work on telling people to leave early to come to work because the weather's bad? It helps us manage the team, right? So we need to plan out what our goal is for the app before we start. Thank you for taking the time to view this training, and going forward in the next one, we're going to actually start building.